John's Gospel, we come to, it's a long story. It's a story that we are right to take time to read it all here this morning. One of the things that to make note of as we finish off this story here in John chapter 11 is that this story serves as kind of a turning point in John's gospel. It serves as the conclusion to, in John's gospel, what is the public ministry of Jesus. The conclusion of that public ministry as he heads to the cross. And we're going to begin now a section in chapter 12 of John's gospel of his kind of private ministry with his disciples, preparing them to understand what's going to happen on Good Friday. So we pick up the story here in verse 28. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher's here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been there with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha. Martha's the practical one. Martha throughout the story is the practical one. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. Lord God, we ask that we would see with fresh eyes the story that John paints for us so vividly this morning. This incredible, miraculous story of life from death. Lord God, may we see with fresh eyes that we might believe as those who saw it first believed. May we believe in the same way. In the name of Father, Son, and Spirit, we ask these things. Amen. So timing is everything, right? Timing is everything. From a recipe that requires very exact timing. You know, have you ever done one of those recipes where it's very closely prescribed? Peg would probably be able to affirm this. Some of the stuff that she bakes, the timing, it has to be impeccable for it to taste so good. I'm glad your timing is so impeccable, Peg, because your stuff is good. Timing is everything when it comes down to the difference between another ho-hum day and tragedy. Seconds sometimes separate the ho-hum average day going along as always, and tragedy that becomes life-altering. Decisions in life sometimes are made spur of the moment that completely alter our lives. So 2 young men, this is probably January, February, sometime there, early midwinter in 1980, off on a college visit, and they visited Ohio University one afternoon, and then they stayed overnight at the Holodome. You remember the old Holodomes, with the big domed pools, and they would usually have a putt-putt course. And they stayed overnight at the Holodome awaiting a visit the next day at Muskingum College in southeastern Ohio. And they woke up 15 minutes before their appointment, and they looked at each other after, they stayed up all night swimming, playing putt-putt, watching movies. They woke up at 9:45, appointment at 10 o'clock, 20 minutes away at Muskingum College. They looked at each other in opposite beds and said, we're never going to go to Muskingum College. Let's just sleep. Let's go back to sleep. Another 5 minutes pass. They look at each other again. Mr. Conselman, our guidance counselor, is going to be upset if we say we missed, and he'll find out if we missed this appointment. So let's just go. We'll be late, but let's just go. And so that cold, wintry morning, they show up at Muskingum College, spur-of-the-moment decision, and it becomes life-changing because they go to Muskingum College. And they meet friends there. Their lives are changed there. That's me. So the row there of young people wouldn't be there if I had not gone to Muskingum College and met Tammy Slopey. And we can multiply over and over again the ways that timing is everything in our lives and makes all the difference between who we are and who we might have been. And so is the case in our story this morning. Timing is everything. Timing in John's Gospel is front and center, and maybe no more so than in this story that we read, and all the more does it call our attention to this question that inevitably we ask when we encounter this story, because it says that because Jesus loved Lazarus, he delayed going. How do we make sense of this? When he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. When he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. It doesn't sound like the response of a friend who is deeply moved, who has deep connections, it doesn't sound like the typical response of love, and yet God's timing is always right. How do we make sense of it? The first thing we want to say is that, or wonder, and many people, when you hear people's reactions to this story, many wonder this very thing. Isn't this cruel and unusual punishment? We encounter it even at the end of the story, right? Where some of the Jews recognize Jesus' compassion when he weeps. See how much he loved him. But others, what are they asking? Others are asking, well, couldn't he have made a difference? They're wondering, why the delay? It makes us wonder, why the delay? Why Jesus? Why would John put it in those terms when he uses the word therefore, the word in Greek that is implying a logical connection between Jesus' love for Lazarus and his intentional delay in going to him? How do we make sense of this? You know, one thing that we ought to be cautious about, there's a danger of being both trite and spurious in how we respond to tragedy. There's a danger in being trite, that is walking out this kind of truism, this saying, well, it's easy to make sense of this story because God had a bigger purpose in mind. God has a plan for your tragedy. So that's oftentimes the way that it gets put by well-intentioned Christians in the face of tragedy. Your loved one is in a better place. We find these trite ways of trying to satisfy and console, comfort, when indeed all we're doing is covering over the reality that shows up when Jesus weeps. That the death of Lazarus is a tragedy, it's a loss, and it's painful. And spurious because what masquerades as compassion is really an attempt to explain what can't be explained. An attempt to make connections in a way that we can't, given our limited perspective, make connections. Here's how Frederick Bruner, who comments on John's Gospel, this story in John's Gospel, here's how he says it. As opposed to thinking that God has this day planner, that the way that we understand how important time is, that God somehow plans out each moment and second, and that's our concern. As opposed to that perspective, here's how Bruner responds to this passage. Retrospectively, James Baldwin's dictum comes from his novel, The Fire Next Time, can help in some situations. It goes something like this: the Lord never seems to get there when you want him, but when he arrives, he's always right on time. This saying, says Bruner, fits our story in the end. This saying fits our story in the end, but it does not at first lessen the pain of the afflicted parties in their now. Jesus' delays always hurt, and our text is honest. Jesus' delays always hurt. We all know that firsthand. We all know people who have suffered loss, who have suffered some kind of tragedy or loss, or suffered in a way that belies the fact that what we long for with regard to the healing that Jesus promises, the very life that Jesus promises, is put off. It doesn't come at our desired time. We don't control the timing of it. And so we learn this lesson that even though there is this connection between Jesus' intentional delay and the Lord's glory and Jesus' love for his friend, even though all of those come together, nonetheless it's not ours to unravel it. What we have in this story is a foreshadowing. What we have throughout John's Gospel, the first 11 chapters of the public ministry of Jesus, are pointers. Signs is the way that John talks about them. Miracles, these great works of Jesus that are pointers to the reason he came. And what we have in this story is the final, most dramatic, most perfect pointer to the reality of why Jesus came in the first place. It's a foreshadowing of the fullness of time. Paul puts it that way, that in the fullness of time, God sends his own Son. In the fullness of time, the Son of God incarnate takes on human flesh, willing to accept a life of the servant, to stretch his arms out on a cross in the fullness of time. And so Jesus says several times in this passage that this is for the glory of God. This is indeed for the sake of revealing God's glory. And Lazarus' death and being raised from the dead is a pointer. It's a little bit of a taste of what's to come just a short while later, as Jesus has returned to the area of Jerusalem and now instigates, provokes the religious leaders to their final act of desperate measures to try and silence him by handing him over to the Romans and putting him to death. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind, seemingly a simple miracle now in light of other things, could he not have also kept this man from dying? There's a danger in thinking that we can arrogantly determine the Lord's timing. In thinking that somehow we can predict or determine how the Lord ought to act in any circumstance. Even the well-intentioned words of Martha and Mary, who repeats those same words, if you had been here, our brother would still be alive. What lays behind those is an arrogant, a presumptuous posture, even though it's one that God can stomach. You know, this is the beauty of the psalmist who says, "How long, O Lord? How long do we have to wait?" Even to the point where the psalmist, in wrestling with the Lord's timing of things, where the psalmist might accuse, in a kind of arrogance, accuse the Lord of somehow failing. You made this promise to us, but you're not here. You haven't yet shown up. And your enemies, our enemies, are making fun of you. They find this opportunity of your delay to be an opportunity to poke jest and to poke fun and to suggest that you aren't really Lord. So Lord, when are you going to show up? The danger of that kind of arrogance, presumption, is that it can blind us. It can blind us to the Lord's purposes. We get so wrapped up in what we think ought to be the Lord's timing that we fail to recognize his purposes. This is where that trite saying, the Lord has a plan. The Lord does have a plan. That does lay behind all that happens in our lives. So even though in times of tragedy that saying is trite, it still points to a deeper truth that indeed the Lord's, Jesus' delay is because he is sovereign. Jesus, as the eternal Son who has now taken on human flesh, is sovereign. He says earlier in the gospel, look, I lay down my life of my own accord. I'm the one who's going to decide when my life is laid down and when I can take it back. I can lay it down and I can take it back up again. I am not going to be a victim of religious leaders or Roman Empire. It may seem like their timing is what is impeccable and undefeatable. But in fact, I am the one who is sovereign here. So Jesus shows up on the fourth day. Yeah, this is another Princess Bride, great piece from the Princess Bride. You know, when Wesley, is, they think he's dead. They take him to Mad Max, the magician, who's played by Billy Crystal. If you've never seen this part of this movie, it's worth just going back and YouTubing this scene, because it's classic Billy Crystal. But they bring the prince, Wesley. Well, he's just a farm boy, but he's really a prince. They bring him to Mad Max because they think that he maybe has an answer for bringing their friend back to life. And, his response is, well, your friend is only mostly dead, which means he's partly alive. He's still kind of breathing. When the gospel writer, when John says, when Jesus' delay is intentional, 4 days, the Jews, tradition has it, the Jews understood that possibly the spirit of a person hovered around their body for 3 days, anticipating the possibility of resuscitation on the 4th day, not mostly dead, all the way dead. Jesus' timing is impeccable. He intends to demonstrate without a shadow of a doubt that it is He who has authority to call forth life from a dead tomb. Martha, dear Martha, who is the practical, pragmatic one. She's the one, right, in the story in Luke's gospel. She's the one who's doing the practical things like taking care of the kitchen, serving food, being hospitable. And there's her sister Mary, assuming the posture that only men were supposed to assume at the feet of Jesus as a disciple. And Martha gets very indignant at her sister. I'm the practical one, right? Mary, Jesus, tell Mary to do what women are supposed to do and come and help me in the kitchen. Well, here is practical Martha again, saying to Jesus, no, look, don't roll away the stone. There's going to be a stench. This storytelling of John leaves it unmistakable that this isn't a parable. This isn't a figment of the imagination. This is a real live. This is real news. And Jesus commands them to move away the stone, to roll it away. And Jesus commands Lazarus to come forth. And Jesus commands them to unbind him. The timing of God is impeccable. Even in the midst of what is a painful experience of loss. The question first that we are invited to ask ourselves comes from Thomas's response. Thomas, who is unfairly portrayed, caricatured as the doubter, somehow weak-kneed. Well, look, he's the first one to say what? They know that Jesus, in deciding to go, is going to a place where they want to kill him. And he's putting his life at risk. Jesus knows that, and that's why he chooses to go. He chooses to go to bring Lazarus forth, but he chooses to go because it's time for him to lay down. And Thomas says what? Let's go so that we can die with him. Let's go so that we can die with him. Are we willing to go that we might die with? That's part of John's purpose in telling the story in this way, is for us to wonder for ourselves, will we go? Are we willing to die with and for? Knowing that even in dying with Christ, that we live with Christ. Another way to put this question is this: will we resist rushing the enemy's defeat? Will we resist rushing the enemy's defeat? You see, timing is everything. And we know this with clarity from Jesus' own words. that the day and the time of him making all things new, that is wiping away every tear, removing all pain, all evidence, all consequence of sin, death, and the enemy, that the timing of that is unknown to us, even unknown to him. Palm Sunday, this story in John chapter 11 is pushing us towards Palm Sunday and the events of Holy Week. It's moving us in that direction. And Palm Sunday is a classic. This is spoiler alert for next week. It's a classic example of rushing the enemy's defeat. It is people who want to say, yes, Jesus, we know who you're the Messiah. We're gonna acclaim you as the Messiah. We're going to put the palm branches down. We're going to use the holy language of the psalm that says, you're the Messiah. You've come to save us. Save us now. And they want it to look like and happen in the way that they want it to happen. And that arrogance rears its ugly head. We know how things ought to be timed out and the way things ought to work. And where are they at the end of the week? We won't jump the gun, but you get my point. The danger is in wanting to rush that victory because we think we know what it ought to look like, when in fact, what the Lord calls us to do is to walk with him on a daily basis. To walk with him, believing and trusting that indeed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. You indeed are the resurrection and the life. You indeed are the one who has authority to call forth death from the tomb. You are the one who indeed lays down your life and takes it up again. And so we will simply trust in you. We'll believe. And we'll believe even in those hard places, even when life throws its curveballs, even when it isn't the way it seems like it ought to be, even when it seems like your coming is delayed and we suffer because of it, even when we face sin, death, and the enemy in its most exaggerated form, we'll trust. And will believe that you hold us in the palms of your hand. That indeed, no matter what it looks like, nothing, here's how Paul puts it about the rushing of the end of the victory. Nothing in heaven or on earth can separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. No power, no tragedy, no empire, no sin, no disease, sword, persecution, even the demons, the devil himself cannot, will not separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. The Lord's timing is impeccable. The Lord's timing is always right. And we rest secure in seeing it in this story of Lazarus coming back to life. Those words of Jesus are words that he speaks prophetically in front of our tombs. We too, Lazarus dies again. We have no reason to think otherwise. And Jesus, for a second time, will stand outside the tomb of Lazarus, as he will stand outside of our tombs, wherever that may be. And he will say, Lazarus, come out. Tom, come out. And he will name each one of us. Come out, unbind them, they belong to me. Set them free. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Lord God, may